Have you heard about Peace and Turmoil by Elliot but have yet to pick it up? Well, friends, that's a mistake you still have time to fix. Hi guys, welcome back, bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to talk about some books. Specifically today we're talking about Peace and Turmoil, book 1 in the Dark Shores series. I don't know how long it's going to be. I should have asked Elle, but and that's by wonderful, lovely human being known as Elliot Brooks, who also has a booktube channel and also wrote a book. So, I mean, what more do you want? She loves her fantasy. She loves to write her fantasy. So let's talk about her debut novel, shall we? So just some general thoughts, feels, opinions, all of that kind of stuff. I had a great time with this book. I will say that it's no surprise if you've ever watched Elle's channel, which of course I've linked down below. She loves a character-driven, sitting in their thoughts, feels, all of that kind of stuff. And so the first 35% of her book is really introducing you to the 3 point of view characters that I'll come back to a little bit later on in that section of the video. And of course, this is all spoiler free, so no worries if you haven't read it. We will not be touching any spoilers today, but she's introducing you to these 3 characters, what kind of relationship they have to one another, and the countries from which they reside. And I will say that this is a very epic fantasy, political fantasy. It definitely focuses on the political machinations and the conflicts and tribulations that arise between these different kingdoms in this land. And I had a really great time with it. Like I said, it did take about 35% to really kick into gear, but once it kicked into gear, hello. So in this world, there are these almost like creatures that are called fiends, and they're basically, I don't know, picture almost like the Final Fantasy monsters, and that's kind of what they were. They were like these wild creatures running around the world that also will attack people when provoked and that kind of stuff. So there's dragons and these cool snakes with almost sword-like tails, and it's just super cool, super fun, lots of unique twists on different kind of fantasy creatures. And of course there were also dragons, a snarky dragon in particular that I had a great time with. And so then there's this exciting battle sequence for the middle third of the book, and then the later third of the book is kind of dealing with the ramifications of what had happened in that kind of more action-packed sequence and setting things up for future books. And there was a lot of backstabbing and it was just a fun political fantasy time. So if that sounds like your jam, you should 100% check it out. I gave it 4.25 out of 5 stars. My main critique of this book, I don't know what this is, but my main critique of this book was that I would say that the current political landscape is very well fleshed out, and who these characters are, you get to spend a lot of time with them. So everything in the present is particularly well fleshed out, but the kind of more ancient past, or even past beyond the generations that are currently living, is not fully fleshed out in this book. And so sometimes I was a little bit, the cultures from the different kingdoms, I was a little bit confused about whether or not they were separate cultures because of this thing known as the War of Fire, and they split off from a bigger kingdom, or if they've always been separate kingdoms. I was a little confused on some of those details, and I hope that the lore gets really delved deep down into, because that's some of my favorite stuff to do in fantasy, is get the ancient history and the ancient lore, especially if immortal things keep popping up. And there is almost some semblance of beings in this world that seem to not age. So I look forward to seeing what happens in book 2, because I think that she's really going to delve more deeply into that kind of lore and background. But if you're itching for that, you're really not going to get that in this first book. This first book is very much focused on the current political landscape and all of the interweavings of what is currently happening in this world. But I have hope that we will dive more into the past and things that have come before in future books. Oh, and I forgot to add that not only is this book great, but there are so many extra goodies sprinkled throughout. There is character art done by Elliot herself. There is art of the different creatures that she discusses, that she commissioned to have done. There is different like artwork for the chapter breaks, or not chapter breaks, like the intermissions mid-chapter, whatever those are called, that are corresponding to the point of view that you're in. Each chapter starts with a chapter heading that shows you where in the map you are, so you can remain grounded in like which area of the world that you're in. So it's also like a really high quality product that you're getting when you choose to check out Peace and Turmoil. So that being said, let's dive into the individual parts of my review. Part 1 now is the magic and the world building. So the magic system involves these things called chromas. So I get the impression that almost every living being has these chromas inside of them, and these chromas are basically these different almost elemental threads that they can focus on and almost like channel or bring to the surface to enact different kind of elemental magics. So if you pull on your fire chromas, which would be like your red and orange chromas, then you can do different fire things. You can pull on the clear chromas for air manipulation. It's a very elemental based magic system with this magic coming from within. It's not really like an external mana force that they are feeling and channeling. It's like an innate thing that they have, and when people in this world die, those chromas kind of leave their bodies, and as it leaves their bodies, it seems like their bodies almost like disappear or dissolve. Kind of like Final Fantasy X almost is how I like pictured it in my mind. And I think that's just a biased picture in my mind because I know that Elle loves Final Fantasy X. And so she and I have talked about that video game before. And so that's kind of just what it evoked for me personally. So there's the chromas. There's also kind of 3-ish major kingdoms that we revolve around. And so there's different complicated political situations going on within each of those. And one in particular, known as Mysidia, there's almost this civil war happening between these two bloodlines vying for the crown. One who is currently in power and one who believes that their bloodline is more pure and deserves power. And so that's kind of the precipitating tension that kind of bleeds across into other neighboring kingdoms, because obviously just because these two kingdoms, this one kingdom here is having problems, the kingdoms around it are going to be affected by any kind of political turmoil, if you will, that happens in that kingdom. And so, like I said, she actually does a really fantastic job of kind of introducing elements of how the magic works kind of as you go. It's never info dumpy or like long periods of exposition. You just kind of get the information as you need it. And she especially spends the first third of this book or so really laying out who the players are and what the political landscape is, so that when an upheaval occurs, you kind of understand who the players are. And that's all I'll say for magic and the world building. So now we'll split over into part 2, which is the characters. So there are 3 kind of main perspectives that we kind of bounce back and forth between. So we have Dietrich, who is the Prince of Sadie, which is a neighboring kingdom. He's also kind of known as the Assassin Prince. Then we have Princess Guinevere, who is the princess of, I want to say it's like, oh, crap. Guinevere is the princess of the kingdom known as Zenith. And then we have Prince Roland, who is the prince of Mysidia, with the family who is currently in power. Those are kind of 3 main perspectives, and how they all kind of meet and what goes on and the shenanigans that ensue are just some of the fun of reading this story. I will say that one of the point of views expands into having a dragon animal companion who is particularly snarky and sassy, who I fell head over heels for. I just loved her. And so there is a snarky animal companion in the form of a dragon. There is tons of magic. What more do you want? You kind of see, especially Guinevere, go through this transition of being almost this kind of like spoiled princess into realizing really what's happening in the world around her. And so I really enjoyed like that kind of dynamic. And if you love twists, turns, reveals, betrayals, then you're going to have a great time with this book. So finally, I'll talk a little bit briefly about the plot. So the plot kind of, I would say, like I said, it kind of kicks in around 35-40% into this book when you start seeing that there's this like deeper layer beyond the events that we're seeing. We don't really get answers about what all is going on with these deeper layers. We do get a lot of like the high level political machinations of what's going on, but there's like an underlying force that seems to be driving a lot of these things that I'm intrigued really to see what happens. But it is going to be the story of these different kingdoms and the politics and the tension between them as outside forces kind of push things towards war. And I don't want to say much more than that because you kind of just want to go along for the ride in these political fantasies. Just know that you're going to be in for the scheming, the backstabbing, the betrayals. There may be some stabbing, not in like the fun way and then like you're dead kind of way, but like I just had a great time with it. So if any of these things sound good to you, I would highly recommend checking out. It is a debut self-pub book. And so what better way than to support a fellow booktuber / fantasy lover / author than to pick up their book and check it out. I know that people kind of discredit it as like a booktuber book, but I've been reading a lot of self-pub fantasy recently, and I would say that it stands up among the upper echelon of the fantasy that I've gotten to read. As far as the plot and all of that kind of stuff, I had a really great time with it. And as you know, I tend to rate more from like a personal enjoyment perspective, more so than like a harsh grammatical perspective. There are some errors or incorrect word usage or whatever, but like that doesn't really make a difference to me. I just had a great time with the story and it's so much fun, and you should read it and let me know how you feel. And so with that, if you have read this book, thought about picking up this book, are now going to pick up this book, let me know in those comments down below. And while you're down there, give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I'll talk to you again soon, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye!